I'm Tom Landon. On today's episode, we learn what it takes to honor the greatest generation. There are few dates in American history that we memorize. July 4th, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was signed. December 7th, 1941, the Pearl Harbor invasion by the Japanese. Or 9/11, 2001. But also among these consequential dates is June 6, 1944, D-Day, the date of the Allied invasion at Normandy on the coast of France. On that morning, thousands lost their lives in a push to expel the Nazis from France and to begin to turn the war's tide. D-Day is especially important here in the Blue Ridge, and even more especially in Bedford, home to the Bedford Boys of Company A, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Division of the Virginia National Guard. 20 young men from Bedford, known as the Bedford Boys, were killed on D-Day, the highest per capita loss of any town in the United States. It is for that reason that the National D-Day Memorial rests below the Peaks of Otter, just off US 460. My guest today is April Cheek Messier, President and CEO of the National D-Day Memorial Foundation. April has been with the memorial almost since its inception, and her relationship to it and to the veterans who survived the liberation of Normandy is unique, which is why I asked her to come to the studio to share the story of the memorial today. Welcome, April.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate that. Happy to be here.
I always just like to start with background, kind of who are you? How did you get to where you are? What influenced you to love what you love now?
Well, I've always loved history. It's just been something that ever since I was a child was always fascinated in the Civil War and World War II. Anything I could get my hands on. I just loved learning history. My parents liked to make sure I would go to different museums and things like that. But it was a real passion. But growing up in Bedford was definitely a unique experience as well, because I knew some of the families who had lost Bedford boys during World War II. And it was something that always stayed with me, that significant loss during the war, the impact that it had on our community. And ironically, in our own community, people didn't talk about it a lot when I was growing up. I think still, even then, it was very raw, still painful. I remember Roy Stevens, one of the D-Day veterans who came back, saying, for so long, it was like a black veil had draped over the community. And so getting to know the families and growing up with that knowledge, I think really inspired me to want to really have a very specific career path as I went to graduate school and studied history. And then it was in graduate school, actually, when they were looking to build the monument. And as it was being built, I knew that's where I wanted to be, and started out as the Director of Education. Loved every single minute of it and continued to love it to this day. Became president and CEO in 2013. And, just so important to keep these stories going and making sure that young people are inspired by these stories still today.
Right. And I know, when you were the Director of Education, there was a lot of thought to lesson plans and that sort of things to help schools. But as you said, it's not just to teach children.
Right.
I mean, people my age now, if you grew up in the 1970s and your parents didn't talk about it, you probably didn't know much about it. Now, growing up in Bedford is a different story because of that hole left in the community. Let's talk about Bedford's special role during that time and what it was like at the time that the Bedford boys got on the trains and left.
I think everyone was extraordinarily proud of these young men who had signed up. Most of them had signed up to earn extra money. This was kind of the very rural part of the country. Everyone had come through the Depression, but it was still, times were tough. And so they signed up, extra money, the spiffy uniform, many of the veterans told me that.
The girls liked it.
The girls really liked the uniform. But they never imagined that they would be 3,000 miles from home on a given day, and it really the tip of the largest amphibious assault in history. Nobody imagined that. It was, I think, something that after Pearl Harbor, you mentioned Pearl Harbor, many of the Bedford boys, like many of those who served, understood they were in for the duration, and this was going to be very different than what they had envisioned. but they served together. This was a tight-knit group of young men, many of them brothers, cousins, friends who had grown up together. They played ball together. They went to church together. They were very, very close. And there were so many occasions when different Bedford boys had the opportunity to be promoted and go to another unit. Some became sick prior to the invasion, like Taylor Fellers, for example, but they refused to leave each other and continued to serve. And I think that says a lot about who they were.
And that's something I was going to get to later, but it's a good time to talk about it. I think some things have changed about the way the military works now. I mean, if you sign up to join the Army, the Air Force, or the National Guard now, and certainly the National Guard is different because it is a Virginia National Guard, but
Right.
still, I think as a result of the events of World War II and D-Day in particular, the military changed some of their policies, didn't they, about having, like, so that a whole town didn't feel the brunt.
Right. Certainly being much more aware of these units and where they're from, whether there's multiple family members or a whole community, as we see happen on D-Day. So certainly there's much more attention to that, going forward.
I'm sure you've thought a lot about, and you've read their letters, those who've survived and those who didn't, and what were they expecting. It was the largest amphibious assault ever, right? And so what did they know going in?
Well, in the Bedford Boys case, and I should mention, there were actually 44 young men who were there on D-Day, soldiers, sailors, and airmen. So it was not just the Company A that we often envision. But when we talk about Bedford Boys, we often talk about Company A because that's kind of the Bedford Boys book by Alex Kershaw and others. But there were many Bedford Boys who served during the war in both theaters, and many theaters of the war. They trained together for such a long period of time. 20 months they were in England. They trained. They went over to a community called Ivy Bridge, England, and were there for almost 20 months doing their training. And so as time moved on and the invasion date is getting closer, some of them knew very well what was going to happen. Taylor Fellers certainly understood. He was leader of these men that by September he knew what was going to take place, and he was very concerned about it. And he even told his very good friend Ray Nance, who was another Bedford boy, at one point, and he only shared that with Ray, but he said, "I think we'll all be killed." And he knew. With them being the tip of the spear, so to speak, going in on that first wave, that this was going to be extraordinarily difficult, and most of them would not survive. The other young men would find out much closer to time. Obviously, they did some serious training at Slapton Sands in England, where the terrain was much like what they would encounter on D-Day. But I don't know that any of them could have imagined just how horrific it was going to be.
And of course, the date of the invasion was a tightly kept secret, so they wouldn't have known.
That's right.
Probably were on pins and needles, knowing it was coming, but not knowing when
That's right.
it was going to actually happen.
Yes, they knew that was going to happen. Very close. When there's a great picture of them marching out of Ivy Bridge, England, for the last time, and so at that point they know they're getting ready for the invasion. They are, this is it. And in Ivy Bridge, they had become so close to all these families. They had eaten in many of these families' homes. They had become like extended family, and people in Ivy Bridge cried the day that they marched out of Ivy Bridge, England, because they knew that might be the last time they would see most of them.
And I know that among those who survived and went on to live long lives, many of them didn't just go back to Normandy for memorials and things, but they also went and visited those families who had helped them during that time.
That's correct, or stayed in touch with them even after, because they were so appreciative of how they made it feel like home. You can imagine, most of these young men, and there were Bedford women who served. They were not, of course, part of this group, but many of them who served as well. But they they were a long way from home. Many of them had never traveled more
Never
than
seen
50
the ocean,
miles.
probably,
That's
right?
right. So this was an amazing experience, but it was very difficult. They wrote a lot of letters home. It's not like today, as I tell young people, where you had instant, you could get on FaceTime or anything. You've got letters that may or may not get to one another, but they tended to write every day whenever they could, and those letters were their lifeline. It reminded them of home, but it was really great to be in a community that embraced them the way they did. And if you go to Ivy Bridge today, for example, you'll see monuments to the 116th. You'll see monuments to the Bedford boys. It's really very, very moving.
All right, let's move on to the memorial a little bit. Again, you were there pretty early in the process, and you began as a director of education. How has the memorial kind of balanced its role as both a very solemn memorial that is just got a real powerful sense of place when you're there, but also as an educational resource?
It's we always knew that when the memorial was built, and I came on about 6 months or so before the big dedication, June 6, 2001. And but we knew that we had to have a plan of how we were going to educate young people who would still have the opportunity. Because when I was the director of education, and we still had so many D-Day veterans coming in person to the memorial, they would come and talk to the students that we'd have. We could have multiple veterans lined up at any given day to come in and talk to students, and it was an amazing experience. But we knew the day was going to come when we would not have them anymore, and that they were this treasure and this wealth of knowledge that inspired everybody they talked to. But what we were going to do, how were we going to educate after that? And so I think we've always had our eye on the future of that turning point. I think we're at that turning point, and so you capture as many stories as you can. Which we've done over the years. We knew that the memorial itself, which is so beautiful, is an amazing tribute to our veterans while they were still with us. But behind the scenes, we had to look at what's the educational component look like once our veterans are no longer with us. And so really, we continue that today because I think it's ever evolving. I think we look at how we're going to build, which I know we'll talk about, but also how do we reach students who may never be able to come to the memorial? A student who's in California or Alaska or wherever they may be who may never have that opportunity. What can we do to reach those students? And so we do so much now virtually and using different technology, through our website.
No, it's kind of dawn of the internet when you were starting.
It is.
You were starting.
That's right. We didn't have all that luxury then. We tried to make it very interactive, which we still do when you come in person. There's still nothing like seeing the memorial in person and being there and walking around, because I think the memorial has such a feeling of solemnity and remembrance that's important. But I think there's a way to impart that to young people, virtually, and so we work to do that as well.
Right. Thinking back to, I remember when the memorial was opened.
Yeah.
That was a big day. How was it How was it sort of received at its opening?
Oh, I think everybody was overwhelmed because the thing that I remember the most were the hundreds of D-Day and World War II veterans in the audience. Hundreds. I mean, we did it at one point. We had all of the veterans stand, and I'll never forget it because this wave of veterans stood up in the crowd, and there were hundreds of them. And it was just such an incredible moment because you realize that they understood they were not going to be forgotten, that we are preserving this history, it's going to be passed on, and we wanted to make sure they understood that before it was too late. And so that was very important to us. But just the fact to have Bob Slaughter there, who was the founder of the memorial, who he, along with so many veterans, worked to make sure this happened, to see that come to fruition for him, and to see his pride and getting it done was just, again, a day all day.
He was a really special man, and I know that he and the other veterans, like, they made it their personal mission. You had a lot of help in fundraising and awareness raising because you had these people who could go into Congressman's office,
That's right.
Women's office to
right.
say why this was important, and they were a living embodiment of it.
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about the architecture of the memorial.
Yes.
Some memorials to wars are, I mean, some are very classical Greek, right? I'm thinking, you think about what those look like
Right.
in many towns in America. Some are works of art, very kind of esoteric. I think about, the powerful nature of like the Vietnam Memorial,
Yes.
but it doesn't include any iconography that represents Vietnam, right? It is
Right.
just the
Right.
names.
Right. Yeah.
And it's, an amazing place. How do you know, like, how were those aesthetic choices made to represent the men and women who are honored
Oh,
there?
sure. Well, Byron Dixon, who is the architect of the monument, Dixon Architects, did an amazing job. And he spent a lot of time talking to the veterans. He and Bob were very close. They spent many, many hours together. He went to Normandy to get a feel, to see the beaches, to really understand it. And I think that really comes out very clearly in what he was able to develop as a way to tell the story of D-Day. Because I think the memorial is so powerful in how it tells the story as you move along. So even if you did not have a tour guide bringing you through, you get a sense of, from planning and preparation to the invasion itself to victory with the iconic arch, which is 44 feet 6 inches tall. Everything is so meticulously planned down to those details. I think Byron did an amazing job, and it continues to stun people who come.
You really do get a kind of a feeling in your core as you stand across the water feature and look at the wall. You're like, oh, this isn't what it felt like to be there, but I can.
Yes.
It does put it in your mind a little bit.
It's a wonderful, wonderful. That in itself, I think, is such an amazing feature, because I think it really spoke to the veterans. To see that, who said that, when you stand there at that water feature and you see what's unfolding there, it gives a sense of what they were up against. And I think that meant a lot to the veterans to see.
I know you are a historian. You have written quite a bit about this. I know you've done some stuff with John Long, but I want to talk about the necrology database. And I know that you also, let's talk about what necrology is for people who don't know it. It's a good word.
That's all right.
And also, I know you've been gathering data, but also that there are kind of some physical representations of that at the memorial, right?
Yes. So again, this surprises people. But when we were looking to build, when the monument was being built, one of the things that we were very intent on doing was recognizing by name every single soldier, sailor, airman, Coast Guardsman who was killed on June 6, 1944. And many years ago, believing that there was a database somewhere, that somebody had a list of who died on D-Day, and realizing very quickly nobody knew how many
this is our job now.
Exactly. And quite honestly, we were told by most people, well, you're crazy, because you're never going to figure that out. It can't be done. And so that emboldened us even more. We've got to do this, because it's very important, I think, for people to, we all felt very strongly, for people to see the names of these young men, who they were. Statistics are helpful, but when you know who they were, where they came from, who were they? Then that was very important to us.
Especially as the National D-Day Memorial, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so it has taken over 20 years. And we're still researching, actually. I mean, we have the only name-by-name listing in the world. I mean, even in Normandy, they do not have a listing of who died on D-Day. We have the official listing of who died on June 6, 1944. And we have their names on a wall at the memorial, 2 walls, actually, because we research not just the American names, but the Allied names as well. And so you can go up to the memorial and actually look at that wall. There are 266 bronze plaques that list their names, 4,427 died on June 6, 1944. We cut it off at midnight. Because we had to, and it was, we know that thousands more died in the days and the weeks that followed. But it was very important that we get people to really focus on that day and look just on that day alone. 4,400.
This is our time capsule that it all happened within
That's right.
in a one-day period.
Yes.
I see on your website you've got some information about the Higgins boat.
Yes.
And for people who don't know what a Higgins boat is, why don't we tell them what the Higgins boat, what its role was, and also what's its connection to the memorial?
Oh, yes. We're so excited about the Higgins boat because when you come to the memorial, you see a representation of one in our invasion tableau. So you have the ramp down the front. It's really an iconic symbol of D-Day. Anybody who's watched Saving Private Ryan, you saw the troops going in on these Higgins boats, which what allowed us to have an amphibious assault. They were designed specifically so that troops could be brought right up to the shore, unload, and literally they could maneuver around, turn back out, and go back out to sea, pick up more men, and come back. And so the Higgins boats were a critical part of the invasion. And in fact, it was Eisenhower who said they helped win the war for us, that Andrew Higgins, who designed them, was such an important figure in that. And so we have wanted one for a long time, and just so happens we were able to locate one. They're very rare to be able to find. There's only less than a handful in the world.
Where did you find it?
We actually connected with a group of gentlemen in Ohio who had one, and they really they took a lot of time to salvage it, to restore it, to make sure it was, and it was actually already in great condition. And they approached us about having it at the memorial during our 80th anniversary, and then working together to see how we could keep it. And that's what we're doing now, is actually fundraising to keep it at the memorial, building a shelter for it, preserving it, so that everyone will be able to see it in the future. I think it's a great artifact to be able to see.
So the memorial's built. You have some facilities there. How is it changing? What is your vision for the next maybe 10 years of the memorial? What do you still need to do?
There's still so much to do. We developed a master plan many years ago, and the master plan would be designed kind of to give us a roadmap for the future. So how are we continuing to meet our mission, and how can our mission evolve to meet the changing demographics of, for example, young people that we talked about who are used to a lot of digital technology. How do we do that? And so in this master plan, our phase one included building a outdoor walking trail, making sure that we have that we're fully utilizing the monument. We have 55 acres. It's an amazing site, but we really want to be able to utilize every aspect of it. And so we just recently dedicated our Widgway Deming walking trail, which is a wonderful walk along the wooded area of the monument, but all along the way you're learning about the war. We have education kiosks stationed throughout, so you're learning about the types of resources that were used during the war: timber.
How long is that
agriculture? Trail? It's about half a mile around the wooded portion. If you go and then follow our loop around the monument itself, then it's a mile long total. So it's a great walking trail. We've got scavenger hunts and all kinds of activities set up for young people to be able to do that. So that's a great addition. But we also knew that we need more indoor space. We need to make sure we've got this amazing monument, but we also have over 15,000 artifacts, most of which are in storage. So we need to be able to display those artifacts, have an opportunity for people to see rotating exhibits, learn different aspects of the war. And so what's really exciting as part of our phase one is to build a motor pool. We have a 1940s motor pool that we're going to be designing and building that will house a collection of World War II vehicles that will be given to us, but also a place for exhibits in there as well. And then we're doing an amphitheater that will be in the area of that motor pool as well. And that gives us the ability to do a lot of things that we often don't have an opportunity to do. More patriotic concerts, performances, to entertain much larger groups. Now a lot of what we have to do is, we don't like to impede on the tours that are going out during the day at the memorial. We want to make sure that we have the space to do a lot of different programming. So it will enhance our ability to do more programming, but without interfering with the day-to-day operation.
Its importance to the community of Bedford. I'm sure Bedford is very happy to have, an amphitheater, a performance space for doing things. In our last little bit, what is what's the importance of the memorial to the community today?
Oh, um, well, I think it's just a place that people can come not only to learn about World War II and D-Day's place in the war, but to appreciate all of those who gave their lives to protect the freedoms that we have today. And it's not just our community. I think anyone who comes from all over the world feel that's part of our mission, is to make sure they understand we're here today because of what they did all those years ago. That's their legacy, is that we need to remember that we need to remember their achievements. We need to remember what was lost that day, but what we gained. We need to make sure that we're passing that along to the next generation, and not just us being the memorial, but that we are preparing other people, adults and children, to be able to tell their stories.
Carry this.
Yeah, that it's up to all of us.
Well, thank you so much. And, that's, we could talk for a lot longer. I'd like to thank April for driving in from Bedford today. Encourage all of our viewers to make the trip to Bedford to experience this hallowed memorial. Also go to their website, but bring your kids, your grandkids, so that they too understand the sacrifice of the Bedford boys and their brethren. And I do want to say also, this is our 13th final episode of this season of What It Takes. I want to thank the crew and everybody here at Blue Ridge PBS for making this possible. And reminder, you can watch all of the episodes from our 6 seasons of What It Takes on demand on our Echo channel, which you can find at blueridgepbs.org/Echo. We'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel while you're there. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.